Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of All Things Podcasting. These first 3 episodes are going to cover the 3 main pillars that can make or break your podcast success. These pillars are production, promotion, and profits. This episode is going to take a deep dive into podcast production, what's important, what's not, and how you can produce a high-quality podcast. I want to get started with what most podcast managers focus on when it comes to podcast production. The majority of podcast managers and podcasters focus on audio quality first. The number one podcasting question that I hear is, what mic should I use? While having good audio quality is important, and I can give you some awesome mic recommendations, recording in your closet or renting a fancy, expensive recording space just isn't necessary. Too many podcasters spend way too much time and money focusing on tech and equipment when audio quality is not what leads to the success of their podcast. How many people do you know who have purchased their mic and have their recording space all set up, but have yet to record an episode? This is because deep down, we all know the content we create, the episodes we record, that's what's really important, and that can be really scary because it's personal. You have complete control over buying a mic. You can research that. You can find recommendations for mics. When it comes to creating content, it's much harder to know that you're putting out exactly what your audience wants to hear. At All Things Podcasting, we know that podcast production is so much more than audio quality, mics, and editing. What's really important is creating episodes that bring in listeners, keep them listening, and converts them into buyers. If your podcast isn't designed specifically for your ideal audience and is just focused on getting content out there, then you're missing the big picture. The number one reason we see podcasts struggle to build traction is that they aren't targeting the right audiences. They're pumping out content for the sake of content and not thinking about what their audience wants and needs to hear or how to make their episodes flow. And they definitely aren't creating content with conversions in mind. But we'll dive more into that in episode 3. Right now, I want to take a minute and have you make a list of 5 ways that you can optimize your podcast to best fit the needs of your audience. If you're having trouble coming up with that list, then keep listening. I interrupt this podcast episode to bring you a quick ad for our Podcast Accelerator membership. If you're ready to magnetize and monetize your podcast, then the Podcast Accelerator membership is right for you. It contains everything that you or your VA need to know in order to promote and profit from your podcast. It includes things like graphic templates, caption templates, and how-to videos for things like audiograms, videograms, quote graphics, static graphics, IGTV, and SEO-rich blog posts. It includes a promotional strategy roadmap of what to post, when, where, and why, templates and videos for planning podcast episodes that are optimized for action, descriptions and show note templates for YouTube and podcasting, accountability for creating and publishing content, strategies and templates for monetizing your podcast, a private Facebook group for members only for them to connect and ask questions. This membership is everything that you need to grow and monetize your podcast. We're even going to do bonus trainings like how to get guest spots on podcasts, how to get guests on your podcast, and other fun things. Basically, if you ask for it, we'll deliver. All of the templates allow you to really streamline your podcast marketing so that you can get as much content as possible out of your podcast, but also not spend hours creating it. Check out the show description for a link to the membership. I'm going to let you in on the first steps that we take with our one-on-one clients to make sure that they have a podcast that speaks to and converts their listeners from day one. Before you ever record an episode or even purchase your mic, you need to be asking questions for both yourself and your audience. Ask yourself, what is the purpose of this podcast? What message do I want to convey? What is the end goal? And what is the intended listener journey? You need to ask your audience questions about your answers to the previous questions. So you need to put out feelers about the podcast and its intended purpose, the messages that you're trying to convey, the listener journey, so that you can get a good feel for if these things feel aligned with your audience and if the terminology you're using is on their level and easy for them to understand. Then need to ask them, what information they would love to hear from you. What info have you given them that's had the greatest impact? And what keywords would they use to describe you, or how would they search for someone like you if they were going on Google or Facebook trying to find you? Gathering all this information allows us to create a specific targeting technique that ensures that your people can find your podcast. It allows you to validate your vision, to make sure that your podcast starts on the right path before it's even launched, and it allows you to create a targeted brand that speaks directly to your people. It gets your audience involved so that they feel like they are part of the process, which gives them a sense of pride for the podcast. It builds hype and it creates raving fans. It allows your audience to help guide the process for you so that you know you're giving them exactly what they want. It allows you to know what your audience is going to love so that you aren't pushing out content that people aren't interested in hearing. The process that I've broken down in this episode is just one part of our audience attraction method. This method gets your audience excited about your podcast. It draws them in and makes it impossible for them to not listen. To get the full audience attraction method, send me a message about how we can work together to create a podcast that will have a steady stream of ready to invest clients in your inbox.